too much money.
Yeah.
So
Here we go. Ready, set, go.
Coming to you live, it's the Auto Hub Show with Ian and Jeff. Here we go.
Who said you can't teach an old dog new tricks? Hi, I'm Vehlo, the founder and CEO of a company called Retail Resilient, social selling to the car industry. And we help auto dealers, auto agencies, and vendors in the auto industry sell more cars, service more cars, and make more money using our social selling strategy. That includes TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and anything else you can think of. So if you're looking to invest thousands and make millions, we're definitely the social selling company for you. Like I said, who said you can't teach an old dog new tricks?
I was at Larry Coleman's seminar. So happy I came, having such a good time. Thank you so much, Larry.
One of the best trainers in this area for sure. I don't know about anywhere else, but as far as I know, he's the best. So,
Told you,
yes, take advantage.
Thank you for having me here.
I'm at Larry Feldman's seminar, and what I've found is that what he's really good at doing with his knowledge and with his training, he's not filling a bucket, he's lighting a fire.
ways to improve. Every month we want to improve better on what we did the month before, maybe the year before. It's about how fast we can get the cars done with quality work to get it to the front line, because that's where we make our money. And the bottom line is, the longer it takes, the more money we spend. We want to get it down as low as possible. Right now, like I said, we're in a great stage. We're at 4.5 days. In Recon, we want to know how quickly we can get the cars out of the Recon process and to the front line. The average days in Recon, and then the time to line is the most important thing for you. I'm Mike Burrell, and Service Director at JM Lexus.
Good morning and welcome. So obviously feel free to ask questions in the chat. Just going to go into some book recommendations and we'll go from there. So we have a number of guests today, and one of them actually wrote a book. So I don't know if you can see this, it's pretty big, but Verities on an Electric Mule, I think is what it's called. And then I got 3 others here, which is Jolt, Electric Car, Build Your Own Electric Vehicle, and The Car That Could. If you wanted more details on Richard's book, you can reach out to him on LinkedIn or in the description in this video. We'll put a link in there. So let's go over the disclaimer, Mr. Jeff.
Yes, our disclaimers we discussed earlier is the views and opinions of those shared today are those of our guests, and not necessarily that of Dean and Jeff at the Auto Hub Show, or even other brother Jeff Polo, and we like to be controversial, and we leave it up to them.
So if you need to review that disclaimer, it's behind me and it's on our website, just so that you know. There's 2 events coming up in auto. First of all, Canada Used Car Week if you're in Toronto. 1 second here, this is not cooperating with me today. Anyway, it's in Toronto next month, June 12th to the 14th, and the Auto Hub Show will be in Las Vegas for the NIADA convention. That's from the 19th to the 22nd, and that's in the beautiful Las Vegas resort of the Wynn, Las Vegas. If you're diabetic and you live in Vancouver, there's a great charity event going up. I don't know if you can see it. It's not working well. Anyway, Pump Couture, I'm actually going to be a model in it. It's to raise money for diabetes research for young people who have type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes who have to wear some form of monitoring device. And then we wanted to thank one of our regular guests who's going to be on a little later for her images of the brand new Lamborghini. So maybe Jeff can talk a little bit about it since he shared the photos.
Yes, well, of course, whoever thought that Lamborghini, one of the bastions of internal combustion and fuel, is going to the EV world, so they've now got the Gustavo, which you must say with an Italian accent, apologize for anybody who may be, is a plug-in EV, like 8 gazillion horsepower, depending how you count it, and pretty brilliant. So, and I just noticed on the steering wheel there, the paddle shifters. I am waiting for an EV to actually start having gears that you can shift, and have fun doing that again. So very, very cool car. And thank you, Petrina, who again will be logging in just a few minutes. So thanks for sharing that.
All right, so let's get into it, Mr. Jeff. So go ahead.
Well, welcome to the EVs by 2025 show, and are we on track to 40%? What are we doing? A variety of our questions here. There's all this talk about EVs and what's going to happen with them, and we have to do it because that's the way to save the world. Which again, depending who you talk to, says that isn't, but that's okay. So with guests today, we have a variety of guests. We have some new people, and we're going to start with people who are new to the Auto Hub show. So you're right, I got it. Richard Flentge. Did I get it right, Richard?
Pretty close.
He's a former host of EV TV, which unfortunately, I'm sorry, I didn't even realize existed. But introduce yourself, tell us a bit about yourself, your business, and then I'd like to answer our first question, which is: governments all over the world are mandating EV production targets starting with 2025. Will we hit them? And what if we don't? So, Richard, go ahead, please.
Well, I'm here in Missouri, and right in the center of the U.S. I am a very strong EV advocate. Obviously, I work for the company was a webcast, and it was electric vehicle television. And we originally started with converting gasoline cars to electric drive, and we did how-to conversion videos. And then that market sort of morphed into Tesla, and we ended up doing a lot of Tesla technology. And the majority of what we did to generate revenue actually was salvage Tesla parts. So I worked in that for several years, and we also repurposed the Tesla battery. And I left the company. I had actually a medical issue. I was medically retired a couple years ago, and after that, I simply write. So I'm sort of this ambassador. Now, I guess the caveat to that is I came out of the custom truck business. So I worked in automotive aftermarket, and I'm a big fan of the U.S. Auto business. So I'm kind of this bridge guy in between, I would suppose, the two worlds. And some of the stuff I write about is trying to sort of bridge that gap between the two worlds. But to your question, are we going to reach those targets by 2025? I doubt it. I don't see it happening. Traveling here in the U.S. With an EV, if it's not in the Tesla network, charging is still difficult. They're still pricey, so I don't see them. But the adoption curves, if you look at the way they arch up, they run along on a very flat line. It may be for a long time, but when it kicks up, it can be a very rapid adoption. But I don't see it, but I believe they have the ability to produce them. But I think that the hurdle right now is the charging network. So they're not. That's 2 or 3 years away. I don't see that happening.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's very enlightening to see an EV evangelist, or it's an evangelist saying something like that, because most people that are real strong supporters of that say, yeah, there are people. They're going to be solar powered with wind chimes and everything else. So it's really quite the thing, and I appreciate the honesty. And thank you for joining us. It's nice to have somebody new to us. And speaking of new, we got Bernardon. We have got your name pronounced right. And please tell us your connection to this, and give us the answer to your opinion if we're going to hit those targets starting in 2025.
Well, I work currently for Siemens as in developing the automotive strategy, and I was part of a startup that they bought almost 10 years ago, and founded a startup that developed software for design with carbon fiber. So we did a lot of work with Formula One team, BMW on the i3, aerospace companies, that kind of thing. And after we were acquired, now I do a lot of special projects. That's what I like to call them. Sometimes they're projects that nobody else wants to do, but they usually involve some combination of autonomous cars or electric cars. We had a project not too long ago with the FIA where we put autonomous rally cars that detect all those crazy spectators that would jump out in front of the cars and things like that. So yeah, Siemens is a big company. I mean, our division does engineering software, but there's a mobility division that has connected cars. There's the energy division, e-fuels and hydrogen and all that kind of thing. So sometimes a lot of these divisions don't work together. So bringing, 1 + 1 can equal 3 if you bring all the pieces together, which I think is somewhat unique for what Siemens does. So I get involved in those kinds of projects. So for your question, I think it's an interesting question. I think it depends to some extent on two things. One, where in the world you are, right? Because different countries, there's a different adoption rate for EVs. And then it depends what these regulations are, because some are for 2025, some are for 2030, some are just EV, others are EVs and plug-ins, that kind of thing. I mean, and I think probably one of the greatest examples is Norway, where they're saying, hey, 2025, all zero emission vehicles, but they're already at 80%. Right? But then if you look at the US and China, or maybe China might be another great example, where they open it up. It's not just zero, they're allowing both electric and plug-in hybrids. And they're not quite as aggressive, and they're probably going to make their target. I think it's like, I believe it's 20% by 2026. The US is shooting for a bigger number, but not by 2030, 50%. Will they make it? If you count plug-in hybrids, maybe they can. Maybe they can. So, but I have to agree with your first guess in that you got to have the infrastructure and prices have to come down, or else it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. You brought up two things, so that actually you brought up one and Rich brought up the other one, which I've got to address. In China, if they wanted to be 100%, they will be tomorrow. It's just, unfortunately, that's the way the country is. It's, we're going to hit it, and that's the way it is. If you don't like it, tough. And secondly, Richard mentioned about conversion earlier, and we were talking just before the show about how EVs versus non-EVs have become quite political. Getting talking about conversion therapy, if we want to get a little bit of political in certain areas that are there. That's all I'm going to say. Our next guest to join us is a representative of a little tiny company that tends to control everything, and that's Mathew Growden, who is his official title, I think I read, is the knower of all automotive at Google Canada. So he's joined us from the cottage. There you go, Matt. Introduce yourself, please. Tell us a bit about yourself and give us the answer, because you know what the answer is.
Jeez, Jeff. Not the knower, the answerer. And that doesn't mean I know, it just usually means I can find out the answer to many questions. So yeah, in my day-to-day role, I spend time pretty steeped in a lot of industry data we collect from Google search, data that we collect from research, etc. Is it boring if we all agree? I think it's boring if we all agree. Somebody's supposed to disagree. I think the interesting distinction is the question between possible and likely, right? Like, is it possible for us to hit the target for 2025 in Canada? It's possible. Is it likely? Probably not. And I think the distinction really is, as you kind of outlined, is how much effort, how willing is a government or a collection of industries willing to rally around a target like that. Much like Richard said, I think the further out targets, your 2035, 2040 targets, and again, different in different markets, different in different places in the world, they're a little more plausible, possible, simply because a lot can happen in a decade. But right now, outside of the infrastructure charging issues that we kind of have in a country as large as Canada or the US, I think the manufacturing just isn't there. Like, we're just not seeing the number of EVs on the road. They're not being delivered in the volume that would be needed to hit those targets at this point. And they're not going to be for a couple of years. So I think that's going to change over time, but at least right now it seems where EVs get delivered in Canada are the provinces where they already have a mandate. So that lends itself to both BC and Quebec having a higher penetration of new EV registrations. But like I think Ian, you said at the outset, we're still at only about a 7.7 or 7.8% market share number for the country at this point. So we're just not where we need to be.
Yeah, I believe the metrics based on the research we did a few months ago, 7 to 9% mean average. Top three provinces are BC, Ontario, and Quebec, which BC and Ontario and Quebec have the largest population, probably the biggest incentives. BC is probably the third biggest. But also, I think the reason BC is big is we have a lot of cheap hydroelectric power, which means charging anything, whether it's your house or a car or anything else, is very affordable. And it's interesting you bring up China, because I was there in 2019, I went to Shanghai, I also was in Japan. What I noticed in Shanghai was really interesting was that, those Vespa scooters or the Honda scooters from back in the day, I saw probably 20,000 of those scooters that people had converted to electric themselves in the city. The market at the time, I think, was about 30% of the global market for cars of all types. And it is the most highly competitive electric car market on the planet because of the amount of competitors. There's probably been some news you've heard about with BYD lately. But the automotive museum I went to in Shanghai was the most eclectic collection of vehicles I've ever seen. But the thing that was really interesting is they had an electric vehicle proving ground where you could drive any electric vehicle made on the planet for free at that location, which was kind of interesting because the big American brand in China is Buick. So you have Buicks there that don't exist anywhere else on the planet, which was kind of interesting. But anyway, Jeff, it looks like our good friend Petrina has joined us.
Here.
Battle of the ball.
It was very funny because earlier we mentioned, I think Eddie mentioned about Norway being at 80%. And the whole thing about EVs, this whole push about EVs is to save the planet, and I won't get into this, that political debate. Yet Norway is a huge producer of petroleum.
Of course they are.
So it's sort of called, we're going to be clean, and so we can make sure you guys are all dirty while we pay for our cleanliness. Anyway, moving right along, joining us last but very far from least, the person I've already said when I grow up I want to be like, is Petrina Gentile, joining us from somewhere in the Ontario area, and automotive journalist, and the luckiest person I've ever connected to, driving absolutely anything and everything. Petrina, please introduce yourself and tell us about yourself a little bit, and answer the first question is, will we hit the EV production targets by 2025, and what if we don't?
Okay, we won't. Right off the bat, I will say that. But I will introduce myself, as you mentioned. I'm Petrina, and I'm an automotive journalist. I've been covering the automotive beat for the Globe and Mail newspaper in Canada since 2004, and I report on the automotive industry for a number of TV stations like CTV, CBC, BNN Bloomberg, CHDH-TV, the whole gamut, talking about new car reviews, mobility issues, transportation issues. EVs are huge now, and I started driving them, oh gosh, probably in like 2010 when Elon Musk introduced his first roadster. That was all electric, and I've come off of a lot of press launches lately. So was in California for the Subaru Solterra Canadian Drive, all electric vehicle, their first one that's shared with Toyota, and the BZ4X. I was driving the GMC Hummer SUV. off-roading also in California. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Portugal driving the new Mercedes-Benz EQE SUV, all electric again. And then there are some fun ones that aren't electric, I will be honest. I was in, oh my gosh, where was I? In California, in Palm Springs, driving the Lamborghini Sperato. It is the last Huracan variant and the last Lamborghini that will have like a V10 engine, so it kind of breaks my heart. That was incredible, driving on a racetrack, and Lamborghini actually made a dirt track that was off of the racetrack, so you were drifting and really having a lot of fun with this vehicle. And then I just saw the Canadian debut of the Revolto, which is Lamborghini's first plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. But get this, guys, it only has 10 kilometers of electric range.
That's small for you Americans. Yeah, it's, I think they look at it differently than we do. The EV thing for them is just that little, extra 175 pounds of torque and that sort of stuff. And, but we know they're quasi part of that weird relationship with Rimac, through the old relationship with Bugatti, and hey, Rimac builds one hell of a monster car, so, and you've probably driven that too.
No, not that one.
But the big question I have for you before I turn it over to Ian is, when you drive an internal combustion engine, do you have to remind yourself to use the brake pedal?
Yes. Yes. And I gotta say, part of me, it breaks my heart, right? Like it was emotional for me, driving that Lamborghini, like that, they're known for their V10s, their V12s, and it just, to me, it's so much a part of the brand, it's so much part of the history, it's so much fun to drive, and I know, this is the way we're going. Everybody needs to jump on that electric bandwagon. There are targets to meet, but there's still part of me that really loves not only the way it drives, but the sound. What's going to happen to the sound of this beautiful roar of the engine when we go full electric? Because they're planning to have a full electric vehicle by the end of the decade. So it's sad.
Well, it's funny, as a fan of motorsports, I have to admit, watching Formula E and even IndyCar is way different. I do have a problem hearing.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, Jeff. There's a YouTuber that does a lot of car reviews who actually now has an auction site. And I was watching something last night. He was talking about, will EVs be collector cars? And I thought it was a really interesting discussion because, what happens to that Tesla when you got to replace a $20,000 battery? And will really fanboys invest in that original Tesla Model 3, for example? So it was kind of an interesting discussion. I thought it was really interesting because the two gentlemen on it, he's one of them. He reviews some of the weirdest stuff out there, but, very low production value show, but very interesting. But I guess that would be, my question when you look at the end of gas-powered vehicles, high-performance ones, will that be more of a collector's item because it's the last gasp of that, say, a V10 or a V12 or a V16? I don't know. But clearly, I don't think that fan base for those cars is going away. And I remember, I think it was a Star Trek movie of the new generation, and I think at the beginning scene he was driving, I think it was a Corvette that was his dad's, and he wrecked it. And this was supposedly in the future, and it was kind of interesting just looking at that way. But thanks for that. At the moment, EVs are cool, like celebrities at an event. What are the coolest ones you've seen, and what are the nerdiest? Let's start with Petrina because she probably reviews more than anybody. Go ahead.
And the Revolto, for sure, from Lamborghini, was the coolest. It's just because, the styling, the iconic look, and it is, it's amazing to see a supercar that is, a plug-in hybrid. Like I say, it's not very long, but it has over 1,000 horsepower, and that naturally aspirated V12 engine coupled with 3 electric motors. So that's probably one of the coolest ones. GMC Hummer, I like the truck and the SUV. It's really impressive to drive off-roading too. Again, though, environmental issues though with that, because you have a battery that weighs more than a Honda Civic sedan. So there are issues with that. As far as nerdy, like I find a lot of the mainstream ones, you know, the Subaru Solterra, Toyota BZ4X, they kind of look the same. So design-wise, I'm like, they're a little bit boring, you know, there isn't a lot of character, with the exception of maybe Hyundai, who has, you know, the Ioniq 6 and the Ioniq 5 that are certainly different in its design and styling, and the interiors, because I think that's going to be big moving forward, is this just transformation of interiors that are different from what we're used to. And more connectivity with the vehicles. So I just find that a lot of these vehicles, the ID4, you know, from Volkswagen, they look the same. They're not really something that stands out and grabs your attention. And for the price you're paying, because these are expensive, make no bones about it, I kind of expect a little bit more design tweaks, something that stands out a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at, what is it, the iXM, which is basically an X5 on crack, for like $250,000 or something stupid. And I'm just like, why? Like, that was kind of my thought process. I'm like, okay, it's interesting, but it really doesn't look that different. And I think from a strictly design perspective, electric opens up a lot of possibilities that I don't think the design houses are really doing much with yet, because they're still sort of locked in that what a car used to be. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see over the next 10 years. I mean, I watched a bunch of videos on YouTube with projected cars in the future, and some of the most exciting ones in the SUV class and performance and exotic and all kinds of things. And what I saw was a lot of people who are taking risks, specifically in the exotic side and some in the SUV side. But I would say your mainstream automakers aren't taking a lot of risks. Like, they're pretty similar. Maybe the exception would be maybe that ID Buzz from Volkswagen, which I think is well overdue. That hippie van concept, I think, will do really well. It'll be like the Beetle. It'll be a huge hit for them, in my opinion. But let's go with Ed. What do you think?
For me, I'd have to say the Rimac Navara.
Oh, okay.
It's an electric car. It's all electric. It got the I think top speed of almost 260 miles per hour, higher than any car, production car sold. I think, you know, 0 to 60, 1.74, I think is the number. But what I find most interesting is that it can get up to 250 miles per hour and back to zero in less than 30 seconds, which is also a record. So that's not just about acceleration, but also it's truly a sports car. And I'd have to say, I think it looked really, really good. It's very, very nice styling. Maybe because they're so close to Italy, some of that's rubbing off. The winds are blowing right from the northeast corner. But I throw in, I think when I first heard the Tesla Plaid, I like that. I said, wow, very good performance for a sedan. Porsche throws out the Taycan and puts it up against the 911 and all those. The Mustang, the E Mustang.
Yep.
Hey, come on, Mustang, and now you got an electric in there with that name. On the nerdy side, it's not really 100% electric, but the Prius is the epitome of nerdiness.
So what do you think of the new Prius? Do you think they made it sexy?
I said, wow, what's happening? They're giving it up, and they're going for like a real. I think it's a nice looking car, but I think the ultimate in nerdiness is the Cybertruck. Now, I'm
interesting.
No.
No, really?
I'm not against it. No. I'm not against it. I think it's a nice vehicle. I'd even consider looking at one, possibly buying one, but it is sort of nerdy. I mean, it's not, you know.
What did one of the reviewers say?
I don't think any Italian stylist would look at that thing and say, oh.
I'm Italian. I don't say that. No.
One of the reviewers said you might not like the design, but you won't forget the design. And I thought that was really interesting.
There you go.
Matt, what do you think?
I'm waiting for a body shop to specialize in fixing that, because those angles are gonna catch something, even with their technology. And it's gonna be a $12,000 repair of a tiny corner ding. Peter Quiet.
Matthew, what do you think?
I'm a big fan. I have a few favorites. So I really like the work that the Alpha Motors folk are doing. So the Alpha Wolf, which is really beautiful kind of off-road surfer pickup truck, and then they're basically taking their skateboard and they're dropping a bunch of different prototype bodies on it. So the Ace is nice, and the variants of the Ace are nice. So I try and keep an eye on whatever the Wolf folk are up to. I love all of the really rugged, hyper-industrial truck designs, like the Bollinger or the what's that Scottish? There's a new Scottish EV company, the first Scottish auto manufacturer in decades.
Can you even pronounce it, Dominic?
Yeah, I'm sure Sean Connery is going to be their spokesperson. The Monroe, I think is called. But on the super nerdy side, when it comes to the technology, it's probably the Lightyear. Probably all the work that the Lightyear is doing to really drive efficiency out of batteries and out of motors. I think, they, who knows if they have the financing to actually bring those vehicles to market. If they don't, someone's going to scoop them up and roll that technology into their own vehicles.
So no DeLorean? No DeLorean electric? Really?
Well, it's a beautiful car. It is a beautiful car. But I don't know if there are lots of beautiful options out there. But does it travel through time? If it travels through time, then definitely. But before it does, I think the Lightyear might have it beat on the technology.
No Fisker, even though he did so well last time?
Yeah. How many times do they need to try?
I do have to say, my personal favorite, hoping this in, is Lucid. I have never seen a car that does to me what this does since back when I was a kid in a 68 Roadrunner or something like that. We drove this thing, we get inside it, it doesn't smell electric, it smells luxury, it drives, it's fast, it's big, it's comfortable. And if you haven't driven that one, they'll let you drive it without any trouble.
And if you want to check out the video, it's on our YouTube channel. Jeff's driving it, I'm videoing it, and there's a good tour there. We are going to be doing the same thing with the new Lexus and the new Cadillac Lyric, hopefully soon. So just stay tuned for those. Richard, what do you think?
It's slow.
I'm still a fan of the Roadster, and that is a car that I drove actually 2011. I started with those. I always and still, I believe it will be the most collectible car in world history. That's my prediction for your show. And being launched into space, I still chit chat with Gruber Motors, which he's the auto shop of the future out in Phoenix that repairs the Tesla Roadsters, and I love them. Now, I think one you missed is Canoe.
Yeah,
the
interesting.
new van and the platform, and that's not very far from me. That's their factory. One of their headquarters is a couple hundred miles away. It's super nerdy. It's got a flexible platform. They have really the skate basically down, and they've got the technology built. They had a little funding issues, which they ran out of money, and they ended up kind of selling the company out to investors that hold warrants over the stock. So, but I see Canoe probably as the dark horse of the planet. If it gets hooked up with Walmart and you start having 80,000 car dealerships pop up with a Canoe parked out front, it may be a game changer. But they got to make it.
Yeah.
So, but that would be my pick.
I think here's an opportunity for an angel investor to step in for all these almost bankrupt companies, Down and Canoe, and put them all together in one platform to park them at Walmart's.
It's probably what's coming.
It's the Walmart family. There you go.
Yeah.
Well, you did have it in the early days of auto back at the turn of the last century. I mean, you did have a lot of car companies that eventually went out of business, and I think you're seeing the same with electric, not only globally but also in the China market. There's going to be less. We were talking, Jeff and I, about a company out of Vietnam called VinFast that has some locations here, one in a high-end neighborhood and one in more of the regional neighborhood, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens with them. I don't know how it's going to go, but it's definitely interesting. So go ahead, Jeff.
So we've now been light, we've now been having a lot of fun and everything else, but let's get down to the brass tacks. There's two very distinct sides of the EV debate. First of all, there's this group that says it's the Holy Grail. It's going to change the world, it's going to save us from ourselves. And then of course, there's the others that say they're not sustainable due to limitations on various fronts. So Ed, I'm gonna ask you first, which thought process is closest to reality? Number one, it's the Holy Grail, and number two, it just can't happen properly. Ed.
You're muted.
Ed, you're on mute.
There you go.
There we go. Yeah, can you hear me? Good.
Yep.
I think, are we up?
Yep.
I would tend towards number two, not the sustainable, and I'll give you some reasons on that. First is the sources of the power, right? If you got coal-fired power plants, it's not really doing too much for the environment. The emissions in producing the batteries. You're expecting a lot of minerals, rare minerals that are required for this. And always recycling. So I think if you were to step back a little bit and probably say, could hybrids, at least in the short term, until battery technology evolves a bit more, could they be a big step towards a more sustainable fleet of cars? And I would say probably yes. But for pure electric right now, I think it's a little tough, especially when there's this race to put, 300-400 mile range into these cars, and you're just hauling around a bunch of batteries all the time. So that's my thought on that.
Yeah, I think Mr. Toto would agree with you when they launched the new Prius. He had some opinions. But anyway, go ahead, Jeff.
It's very true. Petrina, what's your thoughts?
I'm with that, the latter, for sure. There's too many things at play here, like especially with the raw materials, the lithium, the nickel, the infrastructure as well. That's a huge a stumbling block for us, especially in many parts of the world, like in Canada and in the US, where there is certainly a lack of infrastructure. So I think it is not the holy grail as many people would lead you to believe. Hybrids might be, that step towards it, towards full electric, but at this point, I think it's still a ways away.
Well, look, it's awfully funny because I had a conversation on the weekend with a friend of mine who says to me, what should I do? I gotta buy a car. But he buys cars every 10 years. And I said to him, well, the reality is if you're gonna go 10 years out, you might as well get an electric. You rarely ever drive long distances, and you might as well. The problem being right now is you go in and they don't have one, and they say, by the way, we can order one, you can't spec it out. And then what I've seen happening with a lot of people, all of a sudden you get a phone call 3 weeks later, we've got a car for you, do you want it? So it is that, and it's a very interesting thing. And we see online this debate, and we mentioned this pre-show, it's almost people are attacking each other. It's like, they're gonna stop this. You can't do hydrogen because hydrogen's gonna do that, which we'll deal in a minute, by the way, Brian, as I said earlier. But it's a very interesting debate. And Richard, tell us more about your thoughts on it.
It's the Holy Grail. And that's basically the entire premise of my entire book, is how we're going to convert all our fossil fuel consumption over to a portable battery. In market scenarios, which I use a couple of analysis like Polaroid, Kodak, you can say Sears, you can say Kmart, industries that sit when another competitor has a cost advantage, which you need to understand the cost advantage of much fewer parts in the process, as well as a different configuration of the transmission, the console. All of these things are being eliminated in the manufacturing process. Tesla is producing the same thing at a much lower cost for them to produce it, and a much simpler process. Low-cost producers tend to win in the marketplace, but the whole trajectory of what these world governments have projected is that the environmental factors are eventually going to overwhelm us with what's coming out of the tailpipes. So they've already made the decisions to convert to electric. You're right, the marketplace hasn't caught up yet. And really, the marketplace hasn't caught up because it's not pragmatic. It doesn't make sense to a lot of people. When the electric vehicle is cheap enough, which it's gonna get to, because that was the last Tesla's Investors Day, Elon Musk kind of showed his hand. He said the cost of making these things is gonna drop in half. Just like with Apple that developed their computer technology, they kept going along, but as they were working the consumer, they were lowering their cost of production. When the cost of production gets very low, a consumer can buy a very nice car and drive it all week for $2. The massive adoption is gonna happen. Now, it may not happen quick, so I wouldn't make those predictions, but I believe the writing's on the wall. And I think Ford and General Motors in Detroit and the governments have already made that decision. We just haven't caught up to it. And Tesla stock investors, they certainly are buying that stock at a very high multiple because they believe it has tremendous future value. So I'm a Holy Grail guy, just so you know.
You know what, that's the whole point, we're not all on the same page. But my only comment is, I don't wanna argue it, but is the $4 to fill up your car to charge your car for a week, once this becomes the big thing, then that's gonna jump up to $40. Just like gasoline did, the price of gasoline drops, but at the pump it goes up. Why? Because it's a long weekend.
Yeah.
And someone's got to pay for the road maintenance, so it's only a question of when.
That is actually a big point. And I've gotten cornered a couple times by government people, and that's exactly what they say. And that's actually the hindrance. Behind the scene, the reason they're not pumping out this infrastructure bill is those state governments are saying this is gonna wreck our tax revenue. And that's exactly, I've had personal conflict on that, so. But now I charged on Sunshine, by the way. So there was we had a solar array on top of the building. So that's another sort of a wild card in our list.
Yeah.
But if you're charging on
I got something charging on Sunshine.
Driving on Sunshine.
But if you're charging on a DC fast charger, it's not costing you $2 to fill up in a week. Those are expensive.
You're right.
A lot more for it.
It's about $6-7.
Oh, in Canada, I've paid more.
Well, in Ontario, you got a little bit of a different problem. It's called bad energy management government. It's a little expensive. But anyway, go ahead, Mathew.
Yeah, Holy Grail is not necessarily the right phrase. I wouldn't necessarily use that. But I would agree with Richard that the decision has already been made. That between the OEMs and governments, the timeline might be a little longer. We're really, most of them are targeting a 2040 or 2050 target for full fleet conversion in terms of new vehicle sales. As I like to say when I'm speaking in Alberta, whether you like it or not, we're going electric. They don't like it. They don't like
Good
it.
luck.
But yeah, right. So, but I think
You better have a good security on your vehicle.
That's right.
Go ahead.
The thing to think about this though is really the electric motor is just so much more efficient from a pure consumption and energy transfer. It's like 4x, 5x, no matter how you cut it. And the transition is, yes, we all have questions, and yes, there are issues with charge infrastructure. There are issues with people and range anxiety. I think all of those can be overcome over time. It's really just the reality of we're at the beginning of this journey, not the end. And so some things have been sorted out and some things haven't, and we're not comfortable with the change yet. So I think it may not be the Holy Grail, but it's certainly the map to where the Holy Grail might be, right? If this is Indiana Jones, this is really we're at the beginning, we're not in the tree. Battery disposal, Brian, is a good question, and I'm not going to tell you I have all the answers. I think what behooves the manufacturers is to build batteries that can be recycled, and we also have to look at although EV batteries, when they're yanked out of cars, are not very useful for other vehicles, they actually have a lot of use in other commercial and industrial settings. So there is a lot of work that is being done to take old Tesla old leaf batteries, put them into battery packs and shipping containers, and then use them for like residential and commercial energy storage. Because one of the big problems with our grid infrastructure globally is that it's live and that there is no storage, right? If we could start storing more of this energy, then a lot of our questions and concerns about the grid, they go away.
Agree 100%.
The thing about those Nissan batteries though is you can take them or leave them. You wanted to mention something.
Yeah, I wanted to mention something. I mean, when you look at options, and I've always believed, and I sold a lot of hybrids back when I sold cars, and a lot of people I work with didn't. And plug-in PHEVs, I think, are a great solution. But I think the future is options. It really depends on what you're doing with the vehicle. Number one, the average person isn't going to suddenly double what they spend on a vehicle. So that's number one. Number two, Musk, I mean, I've been a fan of his since they threw the keys at me in Seattle when the Roadster first came out, which, by the way, is a Lotus, just so you know. But at the end of the day, I'm not saying he doesn't have a good handle on what he's doing. I think he underestimates the scale of competition. But more importantly, even if you can get that car down to $25,000, the biggest challenge in North America is the fact that dealers of all types, including Tesla, have buried people in overpriced vehicles for the last 2 years. So you're not getting them out of those vehicles anytime soon. And that doesn't count the fact that Tesla's got forced return lease on these vehicles that are going to be worth 20, 30 cents on the dollar. So they're going to have a new problem, which is what do we do with these cars that are not worth anything? So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But I think the biggest challenge Tesla has than everybody else, and it's similar to these devices everyone has called an iPhone or whatever your device is, solid state batteries are going to make lithium ion versions of electric cars worthless. So that's the big issue, is not just batteries, but battery technology. But at the end of the day, the biggest new twist is what's going on with Toyota. So maybe Jeff can talk a little bit about Toyota's new hydrogen combustion engine idea.
Well, we'll get to that, but Peter's been sitting there dying to mention something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Wait, for those of you who don't know, Peter has no opinions. He likes right, and he thinks that electric cars are the savior of the planet.
Oh, man.
Okay, please.
Well, Jeff, I don't know if I agree with that, but being an early adopter of Tesla in 2016, I've had 5 of them. So I have a good experience with electric vehicles. I also worked in the rare earth mining industry, so I have a great experience on rare earths. In the adoption of EVs and what the governments have out there, there is no possibility that they can grab the rare earths to do it. So the availability of doing it by 2030 or 2035 is just not there. 2050, maybe. It takes 20 years to get a permit for a graphite mine in Canada. 20 years. It's just not going to happen. When we talk about infrastructure and the great move that Elon pulled on getting the $7 billion from the U.S. government to open up the superchargers, he basically cut off half the superchargers for Tesla users. Watch what happens with Tesla users, because they will move away from Tesla, because now they go to the Tesla supercharger, a Audi e-tron's in it and taking up 2 spots. And it's because of the design of the Tesla supercharger. That cord is only 5.5 feet long. It ain't going all, so when a car that has its plug-in point on the side and parks across 3 spots because it needs power, and knowing what it's like to travel long distances in a Tesla, when you get to the point where you need power, you're going to do anything to get it. It's a heroin addict on looking for a fix, and that's the issue with EVs. The concept is is a great concept. Yeah, great. No noise, no emissions, no this, no that. But we got to look at the U.S. How much energy is produced from fossil fuels? We're not really changing anything. We're just magnifying the expectations of if we're getting into a battery car. Yeah, we're doing great. We're environmentally friendly, but let's look at how many times the battery has to go across the ocean. Let's look at the mining. Let's look at the diesel machinery to create the mining. Let's look at the chemicals used to separate the rare earths from the actual non-rare earths, and then all the processes. And then we go right down the line, right to the end of use, where there is the representation of the recycling of the batteries. Yes, we can use them for storage, but they have to go somewhere. It's like nuclear waste. Where is it going? What are we going to do? We're going to give it to Elon. He's going to shoot it up in the Falcon X, and that's what we're going to do. So there's so many factors, and we don't even go into the safety factor of the fires. You can't put them out. It takes 4.5 times the amount of water. There's multitudes of things with the EV industry we have to come up with first before we do mass adoption.
Thanks for that.
You know, a comment though, I think fundamentally speaking, if you go into let's go into the future and assume that some of these problems can get solved. And let's just talk about electric drive just for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Electric drive, you can, with 4-wheel motors, right? Let's just, the simplest version, right? 4 moving parts, you can practically replace an internal combustion engine that has hundreds or thousands of parts. Now, you know, because you got regenerative braking, whatever it might be. Now, what drives that drivetrain? Is it all batteries? Is it lithium ion, or is it a solid state battery? Is it a hybrid? That's what's going to be hard to figure out. Is it in 5 years or 10 years or 15? I don't know, but I bet if you go 80 years into the future, or it's going to be electric drive for sure. And somebody's got to come up with that battery. Look how fast battery technology is evolving. And maybe that battery will be easy to recycle, and hopefully somebody figures out how to charge all these things, right? And so electric drive is the future regardless. And it should, you know, even in the short term, that's probably what's going to be, I think, happen sooner rather than later. And then, like everyone's saying here, I can go in a lot of different ways. I mean, I find it sort of interesting that you have people pro EVs that, you know, like yourself, Richard, that, you know, comes out and says, no, I don't think so. But then yet you think it's the holy grail. And I think that's all about the uncertainty of the next 5, 10, 15 years. But I think 30, 40 out, it's going to be electric with some electric drive with some sort of a really great battery. It's easy to recharge. And I hope somebody figures out what to do with the grids and the charging infrastructure and all that. And I'm sure we will.
So
like SWAT cars with the thing in the middle of the road.
There you go.
Yeah.
So the big question with all that though is, how do you pay for it all? But go ahead, Mathew, you had a thought.
No, I was just gonna say, I like to say sometimes that I don't exactly know how the future is gonna pan out, but I know every car is gonna have a battery in it, because every car has a battery in it today.
Yeah.
Like, bigger one. It's a function of how big is that battery and what is it responsible for.
Yep. So go ahead.
Well, Tesla just, in our experience, I have a couple comments. One, the number one problem with the Tesla was the lead acid battery reported. In the business that I worked in, we actually repurposed salvage batteries. So to give you guys a little bit of perspective, we created a battery controller that spoofed the car. We hacked the software from Tesla, and then you could pull out the wrecked car and repurpose the battery. And then that was usually used in solar arrays. So people would want a very robust battery, and it had a tremendous amount of capacity that was a lower cost. So there is some generation. Now, another thing that went on, which was there was J.B. Straubel, which left Tesla. He was their chief technology officer. He has a recycling center or a company called Redwood Materials in Nevada, and he is taking it and stripping the batteries. He hired one of our employees And we had worked with a lot of recycling batteries. There is some answers there. Another thing that came out in the last Tesla's Investors Day was they are capable of producing electric motor without the rare earth metals. So they're moving that direction. They're maybe 10 years ahead of everybody else. Everybody is aware of that obstacle though. But I still see, we conducted a lot of battery tests. We watched things. Nothing beats probably that lithium matrix as far as the actual technology that transfers the electrons at a very energy dense type storage system. So I still believe it'll be lithium. There's a lot of lithium in the world. But the batteries themselves, and actually in Canada, they called us and I sold a truckload of batteries to a big company in Canada. Lion, something like that. And they were purchasing basically salvaged dead batteries. We call them bricks. And I remember that. So there's interest in recycling. So I don't think the car itself I don't think it's going to be a big recycling business. And I purchased salvaged Teslas is kind of what I did. We were trying to find them wrecked. And interesting, it's a fairly competitive business. So
Thanks for that.
anyhow, those are my thoughts. Battery is recyclable. And there's a whole new industry that's going to come out of that.
Petrina, what's your thought? I mean, you obviously deal with OEMs a lot, so.
Well, what I wanted, to focus on too is that I think that the industry is going to change significantly in the years to come. You're not going to have traditional automakers like we do now. I think you're going to lose a lot of players. You're going to have new companies coming to market like VinFast. You have new mergers, Sony and Honda with Afie showing their electric vehicle. So I think that to me is really interesting to see who's going to be able to survive this, what companies are going to merge together, what new tech companies are going to merge with traditional automakers, what Chinese companies are going to come into the market. I think it's just going to be a whole new ball game moving forward. So that really, I think, is something that sparks my interest, in the next 10 years or so to see who's going to survive and who isn't.
It's interesting, I have to put my 2 cents in on that, because here's the big challenge for anybody coming into the market versus a traditional automaker. You mentioned VinFast. So a very good friend of mine was an early adopter, put his name in, put in his $500, etc. Since then, he's heard nothing. He's reached out 8 or 9 times. I have contacted a local guy who called them and said, I'll call you back. That's it. Nothing's happening. They got cars coming. He knows nothing. He saw the Road and Track article, which slammed the car, and he's off the car. So there is a customer factor here that we're dealing with. I mean, Tesla, we know, does a really nice job on the website, etc. When you walk in, when you want service, as Peter said, it's got to be repaired. Companies and somebody in my humble opinion that knows how to treat people right is going to step in and say, "Guess what? Now we'll knock the market." There's going to be a Saturn, not a rocket, a Saturn EV. I don't know about the brand, but that whole customer thing.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's about customers. So whether it's your traditional automakers, the new entrants, at the end of the day, I think you'll see a migration back to those traditional manufacturers that people had brand loyalty. They had an experience. They now have a solution. You're going to see a migration, I think.
I don't think that there's going to be brand loyalty like we saw before, because you're seeing so many people. I know so many people have put in orders. I'm going to put in an order for a Volkswagen. I'm going to put in an order for Hyundai. I'm going to see, and they're just hedging their bets. What's going to come in first? Come and take. So I think it's going to be a different ballgame now too.
Yeah, and just a comment on Tesla. I was with my son, and I actually slammed the door, the rear door of the Tesla, and it wouldn't open. So what's he gonna do now? There's no dealer to take it to. What's he gonna do? He called up Tesla, and the next day, a mechanic shows up in the driveway and fixes the door with his little toolkit. I was like, wow, that would never have happened.
Hold on, Ed. Ford has that in place right now, and it's a must-have in every dealership in the US right now.
Well, there you go. And I think, but I don't think you would have seen that 20 years ago or 10 or 15 years ago and expect you to go into the dealer. But I think the service side and how we buy cars, I think that's really going to change a lot. Petrina sort of started, she sort of touched on it. But there's a company called Lincoln Company. It's part of Geely. But you can buy the car outright or lease it. You can rent it. You can turn it in after 2 or 3 months. You can even buy the car, and they provide an app so that you can rent it out every day. And I think a lot of it comes down to what we expect from our funds. I don't like this phone. I want the next one. And I think Fisker does the same thing with his Ocean. I think you pay like $3,000 at a fixed price up front, and then you pay $300 or $400 a month. I forget what it is. We can turn in the car anytime.
Yeah, I think the subscription and the shared mobility model is very interesting. There's a book that came out last year about the future of automotive, and I agree. When you look at your average car in North America, it probably spends 8 or 9 hours a day sitting there doing nothing. So there's a huge opportunity there, and that may be a solution to the cost thing. But I think the bigger issue, and it's not an issue, it's more of an opportunity. Eventually, the politicians, no matter what they think, are going to have to stop spending on this. So the big question then becomes, can you sell an electric car without a massive rebate? Can you sell it when there's a cost of fuel? Can you sell it when it's just not affordable because the government isn't supporting it anymore? So that's the big question. We had I guess a big mistake happened last week in the Canadian market when Stellantis is all upset because Volkswagen got a bunch of money, and then Stellantis is like, yeah, well, what's going on with us? How come we didn't get the same kind of money? So I thought that was really interesting. But who's going to pay? That's the question.
We don't have enough money left for them, unfortunately. This is the veterans, but I don't want to get political. Mathew had his hand up, so I don't want to ignore him.
Yeah.
I wanted to comment on the loyalty factors. So
Yeah.
we've seen that in EVs there is no loyalty right now because the actual available models are so, I don't know, scattershot maybe, or availability has been so limited. If a consumer gets it in their head that they want an EV, come hell or high water, then they take the EV that's available. So, and they may be narrowing it down, it may be, Tesla versus someone else, but it creates a really interesting market element that I don't think we've seen in a very long time, where the market share by OEM could be dramatically rewritten simply by who gets vehicles, who has vehicles, what models, what capabilities those vehicles have. But the other, the other surprise entrant in that space, and I have a slide that speaks to this, and this information was floating around the internet last fall, was the amount of devotion people would have to the mythical Apple car. That if Apple is serious about this vehicle, that already 25% of Americans say they will buy this vehicle, even though they've never seen it, it doesn't exist, they haven't test driven it. So I think, I can send that slide to you guys afterwards, but it really speaks to the power of brand and how, even sight unseen, I think that the whole ecosystem is going to get shook up a bit, it's going to change, and that's not even including what could possibly happen with the Chinese brands entering North America and Europe, right? So it's going to be a really interesting couple of decades.
Excellent. And Jeff, we are out of time, so final comments.
Well, actually, what I would like to do, if you're all willing, we are only halfway through our whole thought process in this show. If you're all available September 12th, I would like to invite all of you back for Where Will We Be for 2025 show 2. So hopefully, please let me know if you'd love to join us. I'm going to put you down now and send you an invite. I love shows like this. I love it where we can disagree, without getting down into that whole other thing, you know, I mean, even though I could see Peter and Richard glaring at each other, even though they're both wearing the same colored shirt. But it's a wonderful thing, and I think maybe we can move into a kinder, gentler world. Who was that? That was George W. at first, kinder, gentler, or Dana Carvey. And thank you all. It was a heck of a show, and we're going to put you down and send you invites. So thank you.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Bye, everyone, thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
And again, Petrina, when I grow up, I want to be like you.
Oh la la. What?
Thanks for joining us. It was a great show, and follow us anywhere you would like on your favorite podcast, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and of course on our YouTube, or subscribe to our own channel.